Hello, everyone, and welcome to our special coverage of the final 2020 presidential debate as part of our Hofstra Votes Live and WRHU Road to the Polls on 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University. I'm Jason Siegel.
And I'm Danielle Kosick. This is just the second debate between President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. Last Thursday's scheduled debate was canceled after Trump tested positive for the coronavirus and did not agree to take part in the virtual debate. Instead, Trump and Biden each held a separate town hall event.
This week, the two candidates met again in Tennessee, the final face-to-face meeting between them prior to Election Day on November 3rd. To break down everything that was discussed tonight, we are now joined by Dr. Meena Bose, the director of the Kalikow Center for the Study of the American Presidency at Hofstra University. Dr. Bose, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So the first debate, this was the first debate in 3 weeks for the two presidential candidates. Was this debate more significant because the second one was canceled?
Definitely, Jason. I would say the stakes were quite high here, and expectations were really up until, as I was saying in my classes, up until the candidates were confirmed to be in the debate hall at Belmont. I wasn't certain if it would happen. There were a lot of questions about the muting during the opening statements, the use of masks in the room. These were changes from the first debate on September 29th. And so it was important to see whether the two campaigns would agree to the rules, and particularly the Trump campaign, right, had expressed some concerns. Even on Monday night when the muting was announced, it wasn't clear what the reaction would be. Though within hours, they had said that that the president would participate. But certainly with only two presidential debates and not having the town hall debate, which is what the Miami debate would have been. The tonight's debate coming 12 days before Election Day was highly significant.
So this election has already been different in many ways than other elections. And in this year, many people have already voted by mail when it came time for this debate. So did this final debate do anything to swing the remainder of voters?
Danielle, I think that's obviously, I think the key question as we look at kind of the primary purpose of what a debate is, or at least what it's perceived to be, I should say. Because if the goal of the debate is to change voters' minds, then the track record isn't that strong generally. We've seen debates regularly in every election cycle since 1976. The first ones were in 1960, Kennedy-Nixon. There are really only a few cases where the debates may have made a difference. 1960, Kennedy-Nixon, 1976, Ford-Carter, possibly 2000, Bush-Gore. But in each of those cases, there were other factors that may have influenced changes in voter opinion. So I guess I would say that the debate may not have been decisive for voters, but may have reinforced or motivated voters. And those are both significant goals. I would also say that the debates serve a very important educational purpose in American democracy. And we've seen that at Hofstra, having hosted 3 debates consecutively, 2008, 2012, and 2016. So I think without a doubt, the debates are important in the electoral process. We learn a lot about the candidates. We hear them go face to speak face to face on the issues with fewer interruptions tonight than on September 29th. Does that ultimately change voters' minds? That's a higher bar. But I think the debates certainly serve a purpose of informing voters, and I would say motivating voters to come out for their candidate.
And you mentioned the new rule that was in place tonight in regards to candidates when they have 2 minutes to address a question asked by the moderator, the opposing candidate, their microphone is muted. How much of an impact did that have on this debate?
I think that was, Jason, that was really important because what it meant was that you didn't have the constant interruptions. And I think it was 3 times as many interruptions from the president compared to former Vice President Biden on September 29th. The numbers were really were striking. I think we saw here a couple of times where it looked like the president wanted to say something when the moderator, Kristen Welker, was speaking, but he stopped. I think it allowed some time for uninterrupted presentation from both speakers, which was helpful. we certainly still had a lot of back and forth. You saw the moments when Kristen Welker said 10 seconds to respond, right? Both candidates wanted to keep kind of raising their points. And that's always a challenge in the debate setting. But I think that the having the opponent on mute while for each of the 2 minutes for each of the 6 segments was highly important for, I think, setting a tone for the debate. And I think that made moderating much more manageable compared to the free-for-all we really saw on September 29th.
And once again, we are speaking with Dr. Meena Bose, the director of the Kalikow Center for the Study of the American Presidency, recapping the final 2020 presidential debate between President Donald Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden here on WRHU. I'm Danielle Kosick alongside Jason Siegel. So as you just briefly discussed, there seemed to be a little bit more of respect on both ends tonight when it came to talking to the moderator and even talking to each other. What do you think the change was in this debate versus the last debate?
Well, I guess, Danielle, I would say I think there was more respect for the moderator. I don't know about respect for each other. When you have the attacks from the president on former Vice President Biden's family, former Vice President Biden kept referring to this guy, kind of mockingly called him Abraham Lincoln. That was, of course, when the president said he had done more for race relations than any president except perhaps Abraham Lincoln. So saw where he was going, but I'm not sure that was necessary. But I think, to answer your question, what comes through clearly in this debate, the substance of what we see is that the two candidates differ sharply on their views of the country's priorities, the challenges of the coronavirus pandemic, what our relations with foreign countries, questions about U.S. domestic policy, healthcare came up, race relations, climate change policy. This is we see some kind of the United States really 2020 appears to be a crossroads election more so than 2008 or 2016 was. And I think that the structure of today's debate permitted more discussion of those issues, particularly compared to September 29th, which I think will largely be remembered. This will be the debate, the September 29th, 2020 debate will be the one we teach about where kind of everything fell apart and ultimately resulting in an announcement that the president had the coronavirus pandemic, and several people in the debate hall, including staff workers, got it as well. That's really not the way a debate should be, what a debate should be known for, to say the least.
And you mentioned, Dr. Bose, sort of the stark differences are pretty clear between the two candidates, and we saw that even before the debate started. At the beginning, as they were walking to their respective podiums, we saw Democratic nominee Joe Biden walk out wearing a mask, then taking it off as he got to the podium. President Trump not wearing a mask. Do you think each candidate was trying to send a message in regards to the way they handled that? And is there any significance or any symbolism towards that moment?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, the message was very clear there, right? When you think a mask should be used, how often it should be used. I did think it was interesting at the end of the debate that both Dr. Biden, Joe Biden's wife, Jill Biden, and the First Lady, Melania Trump, both came onto the stage wearing masks. And that seemed to be I think some kind of a recognition, and that was of the importance. And that was a difference from the previous, both the presidential debate on September 29th and the vice presidential debate on October 7th, when the candidate spouses, I should say, in both cases, you saw the Democratic candidate's spouse wearing a mask and the Republican candidate's spouse not wearing a mask. So that would be Karen Pence, the vice president's, the second lady, if you will, and then versus Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, wearing a mask. And then, of course, in the first debate, Jill Biden wore a mask. Melania Trump didn't. Melania Trump, of course, was diagnosed with the coronavirus pandemic as well. So I think and missed a rally this week in Pennsylvania. Whatever the reasons, I think her decision to wear a mask was certainly a recognition of how much has changed since September 29th.
And then we saw that Trump just recently recovered from COVID-19, seemingly without many complications. I know there was some discussion about whether that was entirely true or not, but do you think this is beneficial that he was able to show that he was able to recover without complications, him and his family as well? Or was it hurtful to his campaign in the fact that he got the coronavirus at all?
Well, I think it's fortunate that he's recovered, certainly, and appears to have not had a severe case. And I think that's kind of part of what we're all wrestling with. The challenge of understanding this virus is that many people get it, right? We've had 200,000 deaths, millions of cases in the United States, and of course around the world, but the United States at the top of that list. Um, this virus is difficult to identify. It spreads very quickly and can be very dangerous for many groups, for certain groups of people. Many other people seem to get it and recover, but that doesn't mean we can just. There's a lot in between there. To answer your question, I think the fact that the president got it and recovered is obviously shows that with good health care and the opportunity to get rest and the kind of the best attention, which is needed, right? This is kind of what it means to be president of the United States, that recovery is possible, and that's good to know. That's not the case for everybody in the country for numerous reasons, not just the healthcare available, but pre-existing conditions, the where people live, their access to healthcare, their concerns for meals, for shelter, for their families. This is it. I think it may have the president's relatively swift recovery may have signaled to his supporters kind of what he said, that we can get past this, we'll move through it. The charged questions about allegations or the calls for herd immunity, which scientists have largely, not entirely, but largely rebuffed as saying that's not what you want to do without a vaccine, may have built a case for that. I don't think that the president's recovery will have changed minds, as with much else of the debate. I think it's reinforced where people stand.
And speaking of recovering from the virus, one of the states that overall has done a good job since the beginning of the pandemic has been the state of New York. They've been able to flatten the curve and keep cases relatively steady compared to most of the rest of the country right now. But President Trump in this debate was particularly critical of New York, mentioned the state multiple times, criticized Governor Andrew Cuomo for shutting down the economy, called New York City, quote, dead during the debate. Why do you think Trump talked about New York so much in the section about the coronavirus?
Well, of course, I mean, the president grew up in New York, right? Has a home, has Trump Tower, has very close ties to New York, even though now he's a resident of Florida. This is a contentious issue that while New York is doing quite well now, and in fact, right, our number of states, I think it's almost four-fifths of states now are on the New York's quarantine list. There were problems initially, and those problems in the winter and early spring led to, thousands of deaths, particularly in nursing homes. That was a tragedy. That is part of the New York record, and it's something we have to remember and I think address as we kind of try to find ways to try to look for a plan to ensure we don't see a second wave in New York, as is happening in other states. I think also just there are concerns in New York about working restaurants, the capacity, just indoor dining just started, the greatly reduced capacity, questions about jobs. In New York City, where many people live in close quarters, we're not in an ideal pandemic situation, right? Where it's not easy for people to separate, to isolate, to quarantine. The president is addressing those concerns, and certainly the economic concerns are significant, especially for small businesses, for families that don't have good health insurance, right? That don't have health insurance at all. And those are concerns. They're part of a larger story, I think, understanding of the country. And I think that misses the critiques, by focusing only on the critiques, that misses a lot of what New York got right and why social distancing and mask wearing have become so standard in New York for the most part, and how that's made a difference. But I think the president has largely focused in the debate on the problems in the early days of the virus last spring, when we really all started to see how come to terms with how serious this was. It's very similar to the comments he made about Dr. Fauci said that mask wearing wasn't needed. Well, in March, many people were saying we didn't need masks. That is true. It shifted, and when it shifted sharply. But initially, the view was that this couldn't be spread through just simple respiratory droplets, that you had to be in very close contact and masks weren't needed. Again, that did change. We're learning more. But I think the mistakes of the spring should not define the full narrative of this virus that is now, we're approaching the eighth month, and looks like we will have to contend with it for the foreseeable future.
So then just taking a little bit of a turn, in regards to healthcare, Trump mentioned tonight that he wants to overturn the Affordable Care Act, but he also still wants to take care of those with pre-existing conditions. Would this be possible, and what do you think his plan is to accomplish this?
Well, I can't really speak to the plan because he hasn't announced it, though he said it would be a beautiful plan. It's not clear. I suppose you could mandate that private insurance plans keep people with pre-existing conditions, perhaps provide tax credits. I can't give you the numbers on how that would work. Clearly, the Affordable Care Act, among the most significant changes in healthcare were that people with pre-existing conditions would be covered, that young adults would be able to stay on their parents' plans after college for a few years, and that the lifetime limit on benefits would be removed. Those were major changes, and to make those affordable, that's why the healthcare mandate was part of the Affordable Care Act. Take away the mandate, as the 2017 tax law did, and then you run into some cost issues and how you pay for these services. So it's not clear. It would be important to know what that plan is.
Once again, we are speaking with Dr. Meena Bose, the director of the Kalikow Center for the Study of the American Presidency at WRHU University, recapping the final 2020 presidential debate between President Donald Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden here on 88.7 FM Radio WRHU University. I'm Jason Siegel alongside Danielle Kosick. And one of the other topics that was discussed during tonight's debate was race in the United States and race relations. Moderator Kristen Welker asked a question about if the candidates understand why Black parents fear for their children. And tonight it was discussed by two white men on the stage addressing the question. So how important is it for Joe Biden in particular to have Kamala Harris, a woman of color, as his running mate?
Well, without a doubt, particularly since the tragic death of George Floyd in police custody on Memorial Day this year, the numerous other deaths. I mean, it's just really devastating. More names than we can even give the attention that they deserve. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. There is a problem with race relations in this country, and without a doubt, we as a country, as a society, have to recognize that there's a problem and understand how to address it, and recognize that there's a problem before we can even begin to wrestle with how to address it. Having a vice presidential candidate who is African American, part Indian American, I think is an important, highly important advancement in American politics. Only the third woman presidential candidate on a major party ticket, following Geraldine Ferraro and Sarah Palin. The first woman of color as a vice on a major party vice presidential ticket is significant. And I would say that American politics is more than identity politics, but identity politics are important because they reflect voices, interests, perspectives, and demographics that have been highly have not only been underrepresented or have faced limited representation, if not no representation, but have been discriminated against and have faced some, serious inflammatory rhetoric, poor mistreatment, and criminal behavior, frankly, right? And those, I think, for those reasons alone, Senator Harris's nomination, right, and selection as the vice presidential nominee is highly significant. It's certainly up to people to decide how they decide to vote. I'm not sure that I would say that demographics alone would be a reason to vote for someone, though if people make that choice, that's certainly their right to do so. But I think we would be remiss if we didn't recognize the significance of this nomination, just as we would be remiss if we didn't recognize the significance of Barack Obama's election in 2008. And whether you supported Barack Obama or not, his nomination and election those were significant changes in American politics, historic moments. And I would say that Senator Harris's nomination for the Democratic vice presidential spot is another historic moment in American politics.
And we've mentioned briefly a little bit tonight, because it was a little bit of a jarring statement. President Trump said tonight that he is the best president for Black people since Abraham Lincoln. Why do you think he says this? And how do you think the majority of Black people react to that statement?
Well, I can't possibly try to explain the president's rationale, but clearly he believes that. It's not the first time he's said that, and nor would it be appropriate to speculate on how, an entire demographic group or even a majority would respond. What I would just simply say, Danielle, is when we look at the numbers, you see that by and large, African American voters tend to vote Democratic. African American voters were essential to Joe Biden's victory in South Carolina, the primary contest that really revived what was a flailing presidential candidacy in February of 2020. And so I think that I'm not sure that the president is going to gain any supporters with that statement. If you agree with the president, and perhaps the thinking is that by not focusing on race, you are improving conditions for all races. That might be one possible interpretation. But again, I couldn't speculate on that. But I think, maybe that's part of it, is that we need to focus on common values, not identity politics. I think to some degree that was kind of the implicit critique there. But when you look at the numbers, I mean, without a doubt, 100%, right, doesn't happen in American politics. There are always differences. Women voters, right? President Trump won white women voters in 2016, probably by a lower margin that was expected than the exit polls showed on election night. When we go back and look at the Pew Research Center did a lot of work on this and looked at actual voting, it was about a 2 percentage point difference. Still important, right? But you see so you don't ever see 100%, right? But you see trends, and by and large, I would say that African American voters, right, have been very solidly Democratic voters. They turned out in very high numbers, African American voters, for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, slightly lower for Hillary Clinton in 2016. That may have been part of the issue. But again, I don't think the president's message was designed to get voters to switch their views. And there's a very small number of undecided voters. It was really meant to kind of rally people who agree with the president's way of thinking.
And switching gears to the economy, which was also discussed at length tonight during the debate, Joe Biden said he does support a $15 minimum wage. How much do you think that was influenced by Bernie Sanders and Biden trying to sort of pull together support from the more liberal wing of the Democratic Party?
Well, I think that absolutely shows how intra-party debates in the primary process can influence a presidential candidate's policy platform. I mean, frankly, if we go back to 2008 for comparison, Hillary Clinton, campaigning against Barack Obama, was making a strong case for healthcare reform. This was the platform that her husband, President Clinton, had campaigned on and had a bill that she oversaw the drafting of that failed in 1993-94. And then this became President Obama's signature achievement, healthcare reform, passing the Affordable Care Act, or one of his signature achievements. I think in this case, you see the Biden campaign saying, right, they'll go from Obamacare to Biden care, right, adding a public option. Raising the minimum wage to $15 to create this floor is a similar example, I think, of co-opting a policy position that was raised in the campaign and that the presidential candidate of Biden is persuaded by. And I think that illustrates the strength of intra-party unity building that we're seeing in the Democratic Party this year.
And the economy is often one of the more important issues to voters. How important was it for Biden to attach his economic growth in addressing climate change?
I think that is absolutely an essential link. It's kind of interesting that you bring that up because in the Kalikow School poll that we started at Hofstra, we asked a question starting last spring, I think, about would you support environmental policies to improve the environment, even if there were an economic cost, right? Even if you, what would you prioritize, right? Climate change policy or economic interest? And actually, climate change policy ranked higher. And this was a national survey. It was a representative sample of the population, oversampling suburban voters. I think that points to really the message there, I think, is that people see the importance of climate change as one of the most significant economic national security issues in the 21st century. At the same time, I think that it's important to be a realist, and the vice president's linking those two, that you can have economic growth with a sustainable policy on the environment was very important. I mean, there's still a lot to happen, but making that case is part of that policy process.
And our last question, Dr. Bose, for you is, what do you expect the final week and a half or so of campaigning to look like for each candidate?
Well, I think it will be a busy time. As we said, started this broadcast with the number of early votes, right, is historic this year. Of course, given the importance of early voting, absentee voting, given the pandemic, space out time if you're going to vote in person or to avoid the polls altogether by submitting an absentee ballot. I think there will be a lot of pressure on both campaigns to encourage those votes early on, so that that on election night, hopefully the counting will proceed smoothly. So I think there will be a lot of energy over the next 12 days. And then the real question will be on election night, is there a definitive outcome, or will we need to wait a few nights to see what the results are in certain swing states, right? Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin. This case, it's been come up. If Florida is, if the president doesn't win Florida, his path to victory is very, very narrow. If he does win Florida, it's still a narrow path, but there is a path to victory there. So I would say that, you know, we'll kind of start on election night by seeing where Florida goes and where states that are expected to be reliable, and particularly for the president who's behind in the polls, but Florida, Georgia, North Carolina. And then we'll start to look at the states that are, and if those hold as they did in 2016, then Pennsylvania becomes the big question, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin. So I think it's going to be a busy 12 days and then a very long election night, maybe a few nights. So, you know, good to get rest now while we can.
Right. That's certainly where everyone's attention can turn to now that we're through the final debate. So Dr. Bose, thank you so much for taking this time to speak with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed the discussion.
That concludes our coverage of the final 2020 presidential debate. Our thanks again to the director of the Kalikow Center for the Study of the American Presidency at Hofstra University, Dr. Meena Bose.
Our Hofstra Votes Live and WRHU Road to the Polls coverage continues next week with special hour-long editions of Newsline from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday for interviews with local congressional candidates and all the latest updates in the final week before Election Day.
And tune into WRHU on Tuesday, November 3rd for the Lawrence Herbert School of Communications special election broadcast, Hofstra Votes Live, beginning at 8 p.m.
For WRHU, I'm Jason Siegel.
And I'm Danielle Kosick. Thank you for tuning in.